Hello and welcome to this week's episode of For the Love of Chiropractic. On today's show, we're going to be talking about debt reduction and wealth accumulation. And if you're one of our long-term listeners, I want to say welcome back. I think you're going to enjoy today's show. If you're one of our newer listeners, this show is going to take you through step by step of how to get rid of debt and how to build wealth so you can truly have the life of your dreams while you're having the practice of your dreams. And make sure as a new listener, you hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Let's get started with today's show. Welcome to another episode of For the Love of Chiropractic. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Freeman. I've been in practice for over 30 years, and I continue to work in a $1 million practice that I built, ran, and sold. I've taught, lectured, and coached our profession and helped so many chiropractors build the practice and the life of their dreams. And now, I want to help you do the same. So here's today's show. As I said in the introduction, on today's show, we're going to be talking about reducing your debt load and the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Now, there's lots of different ways to define that, but the one that I like the most goes like this. People who are rich have lots of money. They make lots of money, they have lots of money, they can spend lots of money, and they throw it around like it's water, and that's just fine. But the point there is they make lots of money. They're doing something that's making them lots of money versus being wealthy or having wealth. When you have wealth, the money is sitting there like a reservoir. Sometimes it's family money or generational money. But unless you are fortunate enough to be born into it, the way to become wealthy is to make the money, save the money, invest the money, and have the money starting to make money. And at some point, the money is making enough money that it then can support you instead of you supporting it. And I quickly want to mention here, when we talk about investing to create wealth, there's a few things that has to happen with that money. Obviously, where you're investing it, it needs to be safe. It needs to be secure. Where you're putting it needs to keep up with inflation. And the money has to grow also, not just keep up with inflation. So when we talk about safe and secure, certainly I understand, as I'm sure you do also, there's a balance between risk and reward. How much you're willing to risk the money versus how big will the reward be. And there's an old saying, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And on the other hand, I'm going to keep my money safe by keeping it in a box in my closet. While that's safe and secure, it's only safe as long as your closet doesn't catch on fire, and it's safe as long as it's not stolen, but it's just sitting stagnant. That money has to keep up with inflation. We've just gone through an inflationary bump, and inflation is now back down to near a 3% level. And what that means is that $1 that you put away in a drawer somewhere or in that box in your closet, next year, that $1 is only really worth 97 cents based on that 3% inflation. You lose buying power. So where you put the money has to keep up with buying power. It can be invested in bonds. That's fine. Bonds typically keep up with inflation, but they don't actually grow. So then you start getting into other investments, stock investments, mutual funds, or index funds. All of these things will help you to grow wealth. But what's really important is the balance between safety and growth. And the reason that I say that is something I heard years and years ago from a very well-versed financial person who specialized in helping chiropractors and dentists get out of debt and create wealth. He used to say the reason that you as doctors cannot be investing in questionable speculative things is because you earn your money one whining patient at a time. Again, these are his words, not mine. But because that's how you earn your money, When you decide you're done and you want out, if that speculative investment is in a down cycle, you're stuck and now you can't get out. And there's some things that are more valuable than money, but in this example, I'll say time is more valuable than money. And this isn't a pipe dream. I know many, many people who have accomplished this over the course of their lives and changed the entire course and direction for not only themselves, but also their families for generations to come. And I believe being rich or wealthy does not give you an excuse to then do nothing. It's still important to be a contributing member of society, helping to move the community forward in some positive way, whatever that may be, whether it's through the work of your hands, through the work with your heart, whether it be professionally or through charitable work, whatever it takes to help continue to move humanity forward. But this rich versus wealthy thing, we got to boil it back and start at the very, very beginning. The place that I like to start is with something that was taught to me many, many years ago by an investment specialist. And what he said was, you need to understand interest. Well, I understand interest. You put money in a savings account and they give you some money for it. Or if you purchase something on a credit card and don't pay it off that much, then they charge you a little bit of interest for borrowing that money for the month or two or whatever it is. But what he said to me was just key, and I know I've mentioned it on a previous podcast as well. When you're talking about money and interest, it's really very simple. People who don't understand money end up paying interest. People who do understand interest and money end up earning it. Your money earns money instead of paying money to use money. And while money is not the be-all, end-all, it is a currency, a means of exchange between people. I don't think anybody should be paying to use it just to move money around. I think your money is your money, and if anything, somebody should be paying you to use your money. And taking a deep look at this is actually scary for some people. I've had consulting clients over the years who have told me they're afraid to look at their bank account. They're afraid to look at the balance in their savings account. They're afraid to look at how much credit card balance is due on their outstanding accounts. But this is nothing to fear. It's simply information of a problem, of a challenge that needs to be handled. So the very first place to start all of this is to figure out if you're in positive or negative cash flow. And while it's nice to look at it on a daily or weekly basis, the easiest one to figure out is a monthly basis. What does it cost you to run your life on a monthly basis? So you look at all the things that you're paying, and that comes to a certain amount of money. You look at all the money you're making, whether it's through your salary, through paychecks, through tips, if that's the type of job that you're in, and there's a certain amount of money that comes in on average on a monthly basis. And when you add all of that up versus the bills that you're paying, your rent or your mortgage, your electric bill, your car payment, insurance payments, all of those things, are you running a net negative or positive? Are you going further into debt to run your life on a monthly basis? At some point, you have to put your foot down and say, we're not doing this anymore. We are not going any further into debt. We have to be moving in a positive direction. Stop the spending, cut back where you can, everywhere that you can, and or get a second job, get a third job, ask for a raise, start driving Uber, whatever it takes to increase the amount of money coming in. The easiest way to really centralize your expenses and figure it out is to put all of your expenses, as many things as you can, onto one single credit card. That way you'll have it all on one statement. And as I've said on a previous podcast, I think you should stop carrying cash around because it's too easy for cash just to disappear. And by disappear, I don't mean you lose it. I mean you just randomly spend it on things without really realizing where it's going. And if you're someone who just insists on using cash, and I've known people who do that, allow yourself a certain amount of cash on a weekly or monthly basis that's just your pocket money. But then as you really start to figure out where's this money going? What I'd recommend is just keep a running list in your phone of what you spent money on. It doesn't have to be to the penny. You can round it off. If something costs $1.25, fine, write it down as $1. If something costs $1.75, you know what? Round it off to $2. And that's going to be close enough so you can really see where the money's going and what you're spending it on. There's a doc that I know who was going to one of the big coffee chains on a daily basis and getting a frou-frou coffee that was costing $7. And they were doing that on a daily basis, and they couldn't figure out where their pocket money was going. Well, do the math. $7, 7 days a week is $50 a week times 4 weeks in the month, spending over $200 a month just for your daily cup of coffee. If that's what you want to do and that's important to you, that's just fine. But is that what you really want to be spending that kind of money on? That's a decision each person gets to make. But at the very, very least, you have to be willing to take a look at it and think about it in a hardcore kind of way. There's a lady that I know that likes to stop at one of the donut shops on a daily basis. She picks up her breakfast, so that's something to eat as well as something to drink, and it costs her a certain amount of money on a daily basis. And as we were having this conversation, she was telling me that she really had to talk to her boss about getting a raise because she wasn't making enough money and she was having to draw money out of her retirement plan just to keep running her life. She was running a negative balance. And when I asked her what her breakfast cost, she just blew it off and said, "Oh, well, I know that's an expense, but that's my reward for getting out of the house and actually going to work every day." Okay, how do you want to spend your money and what's important to you? But to really dial down on the getting out of debt thing, there's a simple procedure that's time-honored and has helped hundreds of thousands, if not more people, get out of debt and get on the positive side of it. I'm going to lay that out here, and even though you may have heard it previously from some other sources, it's worth going through to analyze and adding back into your own life. So the way to do this is you have a list of all of your debts. So it's the credit card balance, 1, 2, 3, or 4 credit cards, whatever it is. The full balance and the minimum payment that needs to be made every month. It's your car payment, the balance, and what's the minimum payment every month. It's the mortgage, what's the balance, what's the minimum payment every month. It's your student loans, same thing. What's the balance, what's the minimum payment due every month. And those are the most common ones that we see. I've seen some other ones, timeshare payments, other vacation club payments, all sorts of things, that it all goes on the list one at a time. And then I'm going to recommend that you put them in order from the smallest balance due to the largest balance due. And for most people, their house is the largest balance due. So that goes down towards the bottom of the list. Now that you've identified what it costs you to run your life, and you've identified how much you're making on a monthly basis, you're doing all the minimum payments on each of these accounts that are overdue, call them credit cards, but it's all of them. There's a certain amount of money that's left over. That leftover money isn't really left over. That's the debt reduction money. Let's say there's an extra $100. Okay, fine. You're going to put all of that $100 towards additionally paying towards that smallest balance. Now keep in mind, you're already paying at least the minimum payments due on each credit card. I want you to make those minimum payments on each of those, and then take the money that's left over, that extra $100, and put it all towards the one with the lowest balance. So if that lowest balance credit card has an overall balance of $500 and the monthly payment minimum is $5, whatever, fine. You're throwing all of that, the minimum payment, plus the extra $100 towards that one credit card. And the reason being, you're going to do that for the 5 months, and lo and behold, that credit card is paid off and it goes away. I would even encourage you to close that credit card. Do not keep putting additional charges onto those credit cards that are not getting paid off on a full monthly basis. But then what happens after that 5th month? Well, now you're in the 6th month. You have the extra $100 that you're putting towards debt reduction, and you have what was the minimum payment for that credit card. In the example, we said it was $5. So now you're paying that $105 towards the balance on the next credit card, the one that has the next smallest balance. And you knock these off one at a time. I'll say month by month, but often it's year by year. And anybody can then get out of debt in 3 to 5 years by doing this. And if along the way you get additional bonuses or you get a raise, you know what? You can buy yourself a little treat. That's just fine. But the majority of that money, let's put that towards getting rid of this debt. Get that debt monkey off your back so that you not only start to feel rich, but you can actually become wealthy. And as they're progressively paid off, you're becoming a bigger, more successful doctor. And we'll step back into the office in just a minute. But as you get that all paid off, and you're becoming more successful, seeing more people, providing more service, you can pay that off faster and faster to get rid of all that and put all of that into the rearview mirror. Now, I know from a strict financial planning standpoint, sometimes it makes sense to not pay off your mortgage, and that goes far beyond the scope of this podcast and what we're going to talk about. For some people in certain situations, a financial planner will explain that it makes sense to carry a certain amount on the mortgage virtual in perpetuity because of certain tax deductions. But again, we're not going into that here. I believe that people should be in a debt-free situation. You sleep better at night knowing you don't owe nobody nothing because you've paid your dues and you're being a contributing member of society as opposed to a debt member of society. But now stepping back into the office, when we talk about this same concept with your chiropractic practice, when you're looking at adding new equipment to the office, or possibly even replacing older equipment with newer equipment, it's a very simple equation of what is this new equipment going to cost versus what are you going to be charging / collecting in order to use that piece of equipment. And that gets balanced against, do I need this for my style of practice? So for example, a high quality decompression table could cost in the neighborhood of $100,000. Okay. Can you get one cheaper? Absolutely. Are they as effective? I don't know. That's up for you to research and decide for your practice. But let's talk about the $100,000 decompression table. And I get the question, gee, doc, do you think that's a good investment? Should I do that? Let's look at it from a business perspective. Is that the kind of care that you want to be providing in your office? Yes, I really love working with disc patients and I want to subspecialize in that. Okay, that's fine. So the table's $100,000. What are you going to charge per case? The case fee. How many of those do we need to pay for the table? Well, presumably you're going to charge market rate for your area, and I've seen that as low as $2,000. I've seen it as high as $7,000. I'm going to round off and call it $5,000. That's not a recommendation. That is simply an example so we can make the numbers work. So what's $5,000 into $100,000 for the table? And the answer is 20. So you need 20 decompression cases to pay for the $100,000 table. That's what it costs to cover the table. That does not cover the cost of the real estate, the room that the table has to go in. If you own the building, that's one thing. If you're renting the building, that's another thing to consider. And then we also have to consider the setup time by the doctor. That's your time away from a patient, or the chiropractic assistant, if they're allowed to set up a decompression patient in your state or country or territory. There's a certain amount of money that it costs because you're paying them by the hour. Even if you're setting them up yourself, you've taken time away from doing, call it one adjustment or two adjustments. All that figures into the cost. So when you figure that out, okay, now that makes sense. The other thing to look at is we're going to do a marketing campaign to start getting these new patients to come into the office specifically for our decompression therapy. That's the example we're using here. So what's that marketing campaign going to cost? Put all of that together and then balance that against, is this something that I feel strongly about providing in my practice? And now you have the answer of when to add new services to the practice or not. I know lots of chiropractors that are always looking for the newest, latest, greatest, shiniest, super cool thing to add to their practice, to give them the edge to attract more new people to the office. And while that may work for them, and if that's what you want to do, that's just fine, that is not what I recommend. What I've seen some of the most successful chiropractors do is they focus on what they do. They focus on that with absolute specificity, and they are the expert in whatever that is. Maybe it's chiropractic adjusting by hand. Maybe it's chiropractic adjusting with a tool, something like an activator. Maybe it is using a decompression table, and you are the expert in that in your vicinity. In fact, people come from miles around because you're the doc. And that's awesome. But what I'm saying is, be the expert. Be incredibly proficient with that expertise and not always looking for what's the next new shiny thing. Because my favorite example of being careful of the next new shiny thing, in the gold rush that took place here in the west coast of the United States back in the late 1800s, do you know who made the majority of the money during that gold rush? It actually was not the prospectors, the people out there standing in the rivers and digging in the dirt looking for the gold. The ones who made the money are the people who were selling the prospectors' equipment, the panning equipment, to the prospectors. So while you certainly need a certain amount of equipment to make your office run and work properly with great and fantastic efficiency, do you really always need the newest, shiniest, most wonderful thing in the office also? Sometimes yes, but most often I think the answer is no. Because the money that you don't spend on new equipment is the same money that you don't spend on that $7 cup of coffee every day. That's the money that goes to get you out of debt and ultimately builds your wealth so that you can then do anything you want, anytime you want, with anyone you want, just because you want, which is my favorite definition of success. All right, and that's our show for today. If you have a question about today's show or your own practice, feel free to reach out at fortheloveofchiropractic.com. Before making changes to your practice, be sure to seek legal advice regarding those changes and regulations in your state. For the Love of Chiropractic is an RGF production, all rights reserved. And thanks for listening. Original music provided by Hunter Rich Music.